Yes, welcome to CD 1003. Sorry, pop up. Avoiding housing scams and reducing property taxes. All right, there we go. Thank you, Sam. So of course, please do keep your microphones muted. If you unmute by mistake, someone from our team will be very, very quick to mute you so that you're not disrupting the class and causing any feedback. That's a hint to the team to be very, very quick to mute. Please use reactions to clap or give a thumbs up if something in particular moves you. And of course, if you have a question to ask or you'd like to make a comment during Q&A, please raise your hand to get into the queue. Each instructor does things differently. Some of them like to take questions as they go. Some of them like to take questions at the end or pause in between for questions. So the instructor will give you further details on how to pose your questions or make comments, but please do raise your hand. And all questions, this is NPU University policy. If you've been here before, you probably know this by heart. All questions must be relevant to course content. Please do not ask questions that are not relevant to course content. However, we welcome your off-topic questions via email. Please email Samantha and she'll certainly get that question routed to the right person so that we can get an answer for you. And I think the next slide will show you how to raise your hand if you haven't been here before, haven't done this. You can go down to the bottom of your screen where it says reactions. And if you click on that, you should see a button right at the bottom that says raise hand. You can do that to raise your hand. And if you want to, if it's your first time and you want to practice that now, you can feel free to click on reactions and raise hand, and then we'll clear all of those for you. I believe that's the end of my intro. Welcome again to NPU University, or welcome back if you've been here before. I am super thrilled to have you. And at this point, I will fade to black and let Samantha introduce our speakers.
So everyone, I am so glad to have you all here. I'm actually really excited about this class. When I joined the NPU office, one of the things that I literally love or wanted to implement was resources for those living in our communities and providing them things that they might not know about as far as how they can stay in their homes or how to avoid scams or how to lower their taxes. So I am really, really excited to bring to our NP University stage Ms. Jennifer Rennenbach. She is a staff attorney on the home defense program with the Atlanta Legal Aid Society, as well as Ms. Stacy Reynolds, who is also a staff attorney. And Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you all, and you guys can get started. Wait, are they muted?
I would go first. I'm Stacy Reynolds. I'm an attorney at Atlanta Legal Aid in the Senior Citizens Law Project. And I think the plan I'll do first start with the property tax piece of it, and then we'll take some questions after that. And then I think Jennifer's going to continue on with the home scam part, and then we can do questions for her and or me. Is that right, Jennifer? All right. Okay, so I need to share my screen. And I always mess this up, so y'all bear with me. Whoops. They always mess it up.
Wait a minute, let's see.
Okay, so can y'all see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And it's the full screen, it's not the
You're good.
on the sides. Okay. So we're going to be talking about reducing your property taxes. Oops. Now, in order to really understand how to reduce your property taxes, the first thing you have to understand is how the property taxes are calculated. So it starts out with the assessor's office comes up with what they think the full value of your property is. And it's supposed to be based on like the fair market value. But if you didn't buy your house last year, it's just a guess. But they figure out what they think the fair market value of your home is. And then they tax you actually on 40% of that. So the 40% of the full value is your assessed value or your taxable value. So we're using easy math. So we had 100,000, 40% of that is 40,000. From that taxable value, you then subtract any exemptions that you're getting. In this case, we're using the the 65 and older senior exemption for 50,000. And so you subtract that, and whatever's left over after you subtract the exemptions from the assessed values is multiplied times the millage rate. Millage rate is just a fancy word for tax rate. And then that's how they calculate how much you owe in taxes. So in this case, because there was nothing left over because the exemption was higher than the taxable value, the tax is zero. But if the value is higher, then the taxes would be something, more than zero. So the keys to trying to keep your taxes as low as you possibly can is to try and keep the value as low as possible. And this is not, it wouldn't keep you from selling the house, but you want to convince the tax assessors that the value is as low as possible. And you want to try and maximize the value of your exemptions. So you want to get that number as high as possible. So the two ways to lower your property taxes are using homestead exemptions and property tax appeals. Homestead exemptions, of course, are the exemptions that they're subtracting from your value. And the property tax appeals is how you go in and argue for a lower value, which will then result in a lower taxable value and lower your taxes. So today we're going to focus on the homestead exemptions piece of it because you literally have a week to apply. The deadline is going to be on April 1st. That's a week from tomorrow. So we don't have much time. And I'm going to talk in a minute about who is eligible, but I wanted to show you that there's basic exemptions that actually have a huge impact. And basic exemptions apply regardless of age or income or anything like that. If you're eligible for an exemption, this is the one you'll definitely get. And the great thing is in Fulton County and the city of Atlanta, that includes a floating exemption. For those of you City of Atlanta, DeKalb, there's also a freeze, but which is kind of a similar thing. But my presentation is going to be mostly focused on Fulton County. So the basic exemption with the floating exemption can make a huge difference on your property tax bill. The city of Atlanta schools actually doesn't have that floating exemption, but they do have exemptions that will help with the bill. There's some additional exemptions that will add to what you would get for the basic exemption. And those can, you can get those as you age or certain things happen in your life. So, if you turn 62, 65, 70, if you become disabled, you can actually get those senior exemptions at a lower age. Also, if you're a disabled veteran or the unmarried spouse of a U.S. service member, police officer, or firefighter that's killed in the line of duty, then you can get these additional exemptions on top of the basic exemption. And these are all things that will add up and lower your tax bill. Now, I want to caution you that for the additional exemptions, a lot of them do have income limits. But if your income is, if you're retired, a lot of your income is probably going to be disregarded. Most Social Security, a lot of retirement, those things just end up not counting for a lot of the income limits. So it's worth checking to see if you're eligible for it. If you're working, then the earned income is going to count, and it just sort of depends on what the limit is for the individual exemptions, whether you qualify. There is an exemption for people who are 65 or older that they actually instituted that applies regardless of income. So even if you're still working, if you're 65, it's worth going back and you get a little boost to the amount of exemptions you get. So, and one thing to keep in mind, when you buy your house, you don't automatically get the exemption. So you need to be sure to apply for it. And then as you become eligible for any of these additional exemptions, you need to go back and apply for them again. So, as you turn 62, 65, 70, as things change, you want to go back and apply. With these exemptions, they do continue, except for one. And y'all might have seen the WSB did a story on a woman that that lost the one exemption that does expire and was in danger of losing her home. So the only exemption that actually you have to renew every 2 years is this one Fulton County 65 or older low income exemption. So if you're getting any of the other exemptions, you don't have to go back and reapply. If you're getting that one, you need to be aware that you're getting that one and go back and reapply. Okay, So let's talk about why the exemption is important. And to do this, we're going to use an example of a tax bill from 2018. So this is City of Atlanta, Fulton County tax bill for a person who was actually getting all the senior exemptions. So she's already getting a lot of the benefits of the exemptions. But y'all might remember that, so 2018 was when they had this huge jump in values. And there was a big uproar. There was an uproar in 2017, but they rolled it back. So 2018 is when they actually implemented it. And so one of the things that they did as part of that uproar is they passed some additional exemptions, including that floating exemption. And those additional exemptions actually cut this bill almost in half in the following year. There was no change in the value. There was no change in the types of exemptions she was getting. It was just because they instituted these additional exemptions that it made this big a difference. And really a key to that is going to be the floating exemption. And some of you may have heard of a value cap. It's the same thing. The floating exemption and the value cap are exactly the same thing. Honestly, I had to do the math to figure it out because the way it looks on the tax bill doesn't make sense to me because I think of it as a value cap. But it does actually come out to be the same. Basically, what they do is you lock in a value, you have a base year. And from that base year, each year, the taxable value can go up, but the amount that it can go up is capped at no more than 3%. It's actually based on the consumer price index, which so far has mostly been below the 3% level, but that's the max is going to go up from year to year is 3%. So to me, what you do is you should have the assessed value be that capped amount. But that's not what they do on the bill. What they do is they use the overall assessed value, regardless of what the cap value is. And then they take that difference, the difference in the value between what they really can tax you on and what the 40% of the fair market value is. And they lump that into the exemption part. And so that's how they figure out, what your exemptions, they add that on top of any additional exemptions that you're getting. So in this case, we're using the $50,000 senior exemption. And you can see that it ends up being exactly the same thing. And really, this makes a huge difference. This tax bill, if they did not have that floating exemption, the actual amount that was owed would be almost $400. And you see it's only $11. And that's because they had a huge jump in the value. The way this example works out, last year's value would have been $50,000 because that was the one that they locked in. And it only went up 3%. But if they had been, but basically the assessor's office decided that actually the value went up to $100,000. So it doubled in value. And so if they had actually taxed that full amount, then they would have had the, a tax bill that was so much higher than this one. So, I think a lot of you know people who have had a jump in value that may even be as much as a doubling in value. And that's where this locking it in at a lower base year makes a huge difference. The problem is that this floating exemption or value cap does not apply to all the categories of taxes. And particularly, it does not apply to the City of Atlanta school taxes. That's where a lot of people get hit really hard. I see a lot of people that, they're seniors, they're getting the highest exemptions on everything else. Their taxes are very low, except that the value has gone up. And the maximum exemption that you can get for the City of Atlanta school taxes is $75,000. So, once your value goes up above, I think, $190,000, you're going to start paying the school taxes. And that's where people get hit really hard. So again, even with these values, the school taxes with the highest exemptions would still be like $500. So, I can't tell you how much of a benefit the floating exemption gives to have that for the basic exemption. And you get that when you're getting one of the specialty exemptions, it includes the that floating exemption as well, and all the basic stuff. Okay, so this is where I really want to educate people. The lingo that we use when we're talking about who is eligible for an exemption is that it's the person who owns their home and lives in it. That's what we usually say. And that's true. Anyone who owns their home and lives in their home can get a homestead exemption for their home. But it's also a little bit broader than that. And I know there are a lot of you that have probably either gone to the tax office to apply for homestead exemption or know somebody who has, and are told that if you don't have a deed in your name, that you can't apply for it, or that you're not going to get an exemption. And that's not quite true. Now, if you have a deed in your name, you're going to be eligible. And that's true if you own it by yourself or joint with somebody else. There is an exception for spouses, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But for the most part, if your name is on the deed, you can get the exemption. They're not going to give you any sort of trouble with it if it's your primary residence. But you can also get it even if you don't have full title. You can actually get the homestead exemption if you have a life estate. You can also get it if you've got a contract for purchase of the home, where the end result of that contract is that you're going to own the home. And so clearly you don't have a deed yet, you've got a contract. A person who resides in the home is owned by a parent who is deceased or incapacitated is also eligible to get the homestead exemption, regardless of whether the estate has been distributed. So if the property hasn't been distributed, then there's no deed to that person, in that person's name, but they should still be eligible for the homestead exemption according to Georgia law. A person who resides in the home that he or she will inherit, but the home is still being probated, should also be able to get the exemption. So if you're a beneficiary under a will, or you're an heir at law that's going to inherit when somebody dies without a will, you should still be able to get the exemption while that estate is being probated. A person who resides in a home that's in a trust, and you're a beneficiary under the trust, should be able to get the exemption, even though the title to the home is really in the name of the trust or the trustee. You should still be able to get the homestead exemption. Also, the spouse of the homeowner should be able to get the exemption for the home they live in, even if the homeowner spouse is not living there. Now, the exception that I talked about before is that, unfortunately, spouses can only get one exemption. So if spouses live separately, then only one of them is going to be able to get the exemption. And this is true even if the two spouses live in separate homes that they each own individually, separately, have their own primary residences. That doesn't matter. Only one of them is going to be eligible for the homestead exemption. And I want to really stress that this whole chart is based on Georgia law. This is what's in the statute. It's very clear that there are categories that just don't comport with what the tax office tells us about you need a deed in your name. There's no way to square some of these with that idea. You do need to go back and show your connection to the deed, but if you fall into one of these categories, you should be eligible for the exemptions. And these can be so crucial for especially the legacy homeowners that are trying to deal with the probate or other things that are going on. They should be able to get the exemptions while they're dealing with that. You do have to live in the home. It has to be your primary residence. Now, there are some exceptions for things like if you're out of the house because of health reasons, you would be living there except that you're in a nursing home or something like that. You can actually still get the homestead exemption even though you're out of the home for these specific things. Also, if you're in the military, if there's, if the home needs to be fixed because of some sort of like flood or fire or something like that, basically the statute gives you a year. That's the only one that has a time limitation on it. And then also, again, if the home has the homeowner's spouse or children living in it, they can still get the exemption, even though the homeowner's spouse is not living there. You do have to apply, and there are 3 ways to apply. You can apply online or by mail, or you can actually go in person to any of the main tax offices. You do want to make sure that when you go in and apply, that you get proof that you've done that by the deadline. Because if there's ever any question, if you don't meet that deadline, then you're not going to get the exemption for this year. So if you're doing it by mail, you want to be sure to mail it by certified mail, return receipt requested or something like that. So you can actually show when you mailed it and that they received it. If you do it online, it'll give you an automatic confirmation. Once you hit submit, it should come up with a confirmation page. If you don't see that, you haven't submitted it. You want to be sure to go back and figure out what went wrong. In person, typically, if they take the application, they will give you a little slip that tells you that you have applied. It may even tell you that you've been approved for specific ones, but they'll give you something when you do it in person. But the danger is that, again, sometimes when you go in, if you don't actually have that deed in your name, they may tell you that they're not going to take the application. And I think that's wrong. I think that they should take the application, and if they deny it, then you can appeal it, but they should take the applications. But that's one of the downsides of going in person, is that sometimes they won't take the application. And so I recommend doing it by filing online, because you get the automatic confirmation. You can actually even go back in and sort of check on the status of it. They can very easily ask you for additional information and that sort of thing. So the online system works much better. No, sorry, this is for the city of Atlanta, so this doesn't apply to you, but I went ahead and left the screen in because some of you may have friends and family in other cities. So the city of Atlanta actually works with Fulton County to do all the exemptions. You don't have to do anything through the city directly. You can do it all through Fulton County and everything will work out. But if you're in any of the other cities, you may, your friends or family may want to go ahead and check with their city to make sure if there are any additional exemptions that they need to apply for directly from the city. Those of you in the city of Atlanta, you're fine. Okay, so when you're applying for the exemptions, there is some certain documentation that you're going to need to provide. I'm using the screen from the online thing because it's just an easy list of what you need. You need your identification. You're going to need to show the proof of who you are. And this ideally is going to be your Georgia driver's license or state ID. You just need to provide a copy of whatever that document is. If you go in person, they'll make a copy for you. But, if you're doing it online, you just take a picture and upload it. You're also going to need to provide the vehicle registration. The vehicle registration has to be to your home. It has to be the home place that you're getting the homestead exemption. If your car is registered to another property, like an old address or something like that, you need to get it switched before you apply for the homestead exemption, because that's always going to be something that they're going to say, oh, well, if your car is not registered there, it's not your primary residence. Finally, there's a category called supporting documents. And this is where you're going to put in, like if you're applying for any of those specialty exemptions that require income information, this is where you're going to provide that. You're also going to need to provide, proof that you're eligible for any of the other exemptions. This is also where if you're in one of those categories where you don't have the deed in your name, this is where you'll put that information. And I'll talk in a minute about that. If you're doing this online, you click select files and it's going to come up with the options of uploading the documents either by taking a photo, searching in your photo library, or browsing. It's, for anyone who's pretty computer savvy, it makes it very easy. So let's talk about what supporting documents show ownership. Again, if you've got the deed in your name, that's easy. That's going to automatically kind of get you in the door. If you've had the deed in your name for a while, you don't even have to provide a copy of it. The tax records should already show your name in the system. If it doesn't show your name in the system, then you may need to upload a copy of the recorded deed just to confirm that it really is your home. And if you're in one of those categories where the recorded deed isn't in your name, then you're going to need to find the last recorded deed and then show the documents that link you to that make you eligible. So for example, if you're applying as the child of a deceased homeowner, you're going to want to show the deed to your mom, her death certificate, and your birth certificate showing that she is in fact your mother. Or if it's probate, you're going to want to show the probate records that show that it is in probate. If you're getting it for a will, you want to provide a copy of the will or the contract for deed or the trust documents, just whatever documentation you need to link back to that last recorded deed. In the cases where I'm putting in all these random things to show ownership, I also add an explanation that just sort of walks through how how the person is eligible and what documents are showing that, and so sort of explaining or giving a roadmap for what documents are in there. There is a limit on the number of documents that you can upload. So I would start with getting all the documents you need uploaded and then add that explanation as the last thing. I think there's only been one case where there were so many documents I needed to upload that I couldn't make it for the explanation. The deadline is April 1st. Again, that's a week from tomorrow, so there's not a lot of time. If you think you might be eligible for additional exemptions, check on it now, get the application in. There are a few exceptions to filing by the deadline, but most of them require notifying the tax office ahead of the deadline. So you might as well just go ahead and get the application in, especially now that you can do it online. You really can do it from anywhere. If you file after the deadline, you can file anytime, but if you file after midnight on April 1st, you're basically applying for next year. So the deadline is really to get the exemption for this year. You want to be sure when you apply that you get proof that you did file by the deadline. And we talked about this, that, make sure that when you get it filed, that you're proving that when you filed it and that they received it. If you are not granted your homestead exemption, you want to appeal the denial if you're eligible for the exemption. The main time for doing that is going to be when your notice of assessment comes out. So when your notice of assessment comes out, if it doesn't show an exemption that you applied for, you want to appeal. Let's look at the notice of assessment. So again, this is the Fulton County one. The Cobb County looks very similar. You're going to want to look to see what it says about homestead exemption. If it says no, then that means they're saying you don't have an exemption. And if you apply for one, you need to appeal it. If it says yes, it'll then give some random code, which I have never been able to figure out. I keep asking them for better explanations, and it doesn't make sense. I do know that HF01 is your basic exemption. So if you apply for a special exemption and it's showing just HF01, then you want to appeal that. But if it says, HF09 or 10 or 47 or whatever the random code is, you may have to call the assessor's office to find out if it's the one that you actually applied for. And one more caution. So usually when these notices of assessment come out, the assessor's office is still processing the applications. They get so many applications, especially right here at the deadline, that by the time the notice of assessment comes out, there's a huge number that they haven't looked at yet. It's entirely possible that it's not going to be reflected on your notice of assessment, but that it will be approved. But I still say appeal it just in case. This is your chance to appeal. And if they do approve it, you can always withdraw the appeal. There's no harm in appealing it. So other things to look for, you want to be sure to pay attention to the notice, the date the notice was issued, and the deadline for the appeal. The notice of assessment comes out usually sometime in the like May, June timeframe. There's no specific date for it. You know, it's not like the deadline for filing for the Hempstead exemption. That's always April 1st. The date the notice comes out, it varies every year. And the problem is that that date is going to determine your deadline for appealing. The deadline to appeal is going to be 45 days from the date it is issued. And that's the date it's issued, not the date you receive it, not even if you receive it. It's 45 days from the date they make it available. So you want to be sure to pay attention to that deadline and get your appeal filed by that deadline. You also want to look at what they say about the value. The main purpose of this notice of assessment is to alert you to any changes they're making in your value. If there's a big jump between the value from last year and the value for this year, you want to think about appealing the value. You know, this is not only about the Hempstead exemption, this is also about the value. The last thing that is on there is a sort of it's sort of similar to a tax bill, but of course it says all over it, this is not a tax bill. This is just estimated. What they're doing is they're trying to give you something to compare what that change in value is going to do to your bottom line. But this is just an estimate. What they're doing is they're basing it on last year's millage rates with this year's value. So just sort of give you an estimate of what that change is going to look like. Your tax bill could be very different. Usually it's kind of in the ballpark, but it's possible that it could be completely different. But still, if there's a big jump in the value, but there's not a big jump in your taxes, maybe you don't want to appeal it. It may still be a good idea, but you want to factor in both those things when you're thinking about whether or not to appeal the value. The tax appeals. This is your chance to argue for a lower value. What you're doing is you're asking for a lower total value in order to result in a lower taxable value. This is also your chance to show your eligibility for a homestead exemption if your exemption is denied. You have to appeal within the 45 days of the notice of assessment being made available each year, and that date does change from year to year. One huge advantage of doing a tax appeal is that you can get a 3-year freeze. And what that means is the resulting value from your appeal gets locked in, not only for the year that you appealed, but for the 2 years after that. So for 3 years, it'll stay at that value. And in these days where the values just keep going up and up and up and up, that can actually be a huge benefit. So, even if you lose, you get the freeze. It's not going to go above what the assessed value is, and you get the freeze. So there's not really any downside to appealing. Now, to get the freeze, you do have to take it all the way to the Board of Equalization, or you need to be sure that you get an agreement from the assessor's office to allow you to get the freeze. And you want to be sure to confirm that in writing, like confirm it by email or something in writing. A lot of people are afraid of going to the Board of Equalization, thinking that, it's scary, it's a hearing, it's going to be all, court and things. It's really not. A Board of Equalization is really just 3 taxpayers, just like you, that have been selected to decide what the value should be. The 3 taxpayers going to sit there and listen to you and the county appraiser and decide which value sounds more reasonable, or, if it's somewhere in between. And so as long as you present some evidence that supports a lower value, they'll listen to it. And, what you really want to do is try and give them something to hang their hat on for why your value should be lower. And speaking of evidence, so I saw this on Facebook, and it's one of those things that I have no idea where it comes from. I'm sorry, I can't give the proper credit to whoever came up with it, but it does a great job of sort of illustrating the idea of what we're doing in a tax appeal. What you want to do in your Board of Equalization hearing is present evidence that shows the value of your home is what you say it is, and not this mansion that the assessor thinks it is. So you want to be able to show whatever evidence can convey that. You know, if it's about conditions of your home or the sales in your neighborhood, or there are other homes that are valued at lower amounts. Anything that you can show to support that your value should be lower. This is a timeline of sort of the property tax year or year and change. Everything starts with January 1st. So January 1st is going to be when they're going to lock in everything for the Hempstead exemption. So, if you're looking at the senior exemptions, you have to have turned, 62 or 65 or whatever by January 1st. If your birthday is January 2nd, you can apply for the exemption now, but it's not going to go into effect until the following year. January 1st is also when, the ownership interest has to be there. So if you buy your house on January 2nd, you're not going to get the exemption this year. You can get it next year, and the person you're buying it from would be entitled to the exemption for this year. You do have to file by the deadline on April 1st. The timeline for when the notice of assessment comes out is sort of iffy, but from that date, there's definitely 45 days to appeal. You'll notice the end of that 45 days is going to be before your tax bill comes out. Now, the tax bill is going to come out, even if you appeal it, even if you appeal the notice of assessment, the tax bill is going to come out. When you get the tax bill, it's too late to appeal. If you have appealed, that tax bill is going to be a temporary tax bill. And what that means is that the bill is going to be set at either last year's value or 85% of this year's value. And then it'll be finalized once the appeal is done. But I lost my train of thought here. So what will happen is you get the temporary tax bill, you need to pay it. Probably the amount that you end up owing, usually the value is going to go up a little bit from last year. So there's a good chance that you'll end up owing a little bit more. So you should save money for whenever that final tax bill does come out. But just because you're appealing the value doesn't get you out of paying the taxes until it's done. You need to pay that temporary tax bill as well. When you appeal, the county is going to first respond with, the Fulton assessors will kind of reconsider. And if they decide that they don't want to change what they said the value was, they'll send it on over to the Board of Equalization, but you'll get a letter saying that. If the county decides in the appeal that actually they were wrong, maybe the value was something a little bit different, they'll send you something that looks very much like the notice of assessment, but this time it'll actually have only 30 days to appeal. So you want to be sure if you do get a second notice of assessment that you check to see if you need to appeal it further. If you are happy with the value that they say in that, you could always call and see if you can reach an agreement that would allow the freeze so that you can make sure you can get that freeze without having to appeal it to the Board of Equalization. If it's going on to the Board of Equalization, those go on, they're still processing the Board of Equalization hearings now for the appeals from last year. So it can take a while for it to get done, but they will try and get through them as quickly as they can. Okay, April 1st is your deadline for Hempstead exemptions. Again, that's a week from tomorrow. Get out there and file for them. I want to mention there actually are 2 tax deferral options for people who are 62 or older, but they're very limited. They're very strict on the income. That it's actually all of the income, not just they don't disregard the Social Security, and it's limited to how much you can have encumbering the property. So they're very limited, but the advantage is if you can't pay your taxes, the interest rate is less and they're less likely to, it's not going to go to a foreclosure. So these are options for people who can't afford to pay the taxes. Okay, so a quick recap. The homestead exemption subtracts directly from the taxable value. So it's a direct savings on your property taxes. You must apply for the exemptions as you become eligible for them. And you need to reapply for any exemption that expires. Again, it's just one. I don't know why, but that one, if you do get that one, you want to be sure to reapply for it. The deadline for the current year is April 1st. And you want to be sure to appeal if you're denied or if your exemption isn't appearing on your notice of assessment. So you want to be sure to appeal to be able to make sure that you get those exemptions that you're eligible to get. And again, right now, the county is mostly denying any exemption where you don't have a deed in your name. You need to appeal that. If you're eligible for one of those categories, you need to appeal it. Okay. This is, I'm just going to, the tax foreclosure process, this is how you lose your home if you don't pay your property taxes. When the taxes come due, interest begins to accrue, it already becomes more expensive. The lien gets issued, which is called a FIFA. In Fulton County, that FIFA can be either held by the county or transferred to a third party. Either way, whoever has that can end up foreclosing on it. The foreclosure looks very much like a mortgage foreclosure. They auction it off on the courthouse steps, but the difference is that the whoever is buying it buys it subject to a right to redeem. And so the owner has the right to redeem the property for at least a year. And it actually can go on for decades, but they have it at least a year. The problem is at that point it's much more expensive because in order to redeem it, you actually have to pay whatever was paid on the courthouse steps plus 20% on top of that. And then every anniversary of that foreclosure sale, it goes up another 10%. So it can really quickly get out of control. If you're able to pay that, then you can redeem. If you can't, then they actually take steps, send notices to do a foreclosure of the right to redeem. Once they, and basically all that is a notice saying that you've got a deadline to pay it. And if you don't pay by that deadline, then you lose the house. At that point, it's gone. We don't want that to happen. So the key to keeping the house is to make sure the taxes are as low as possible when they come due so that you can afford them. Help with all this, and that's the end of my portion. So are there any questions?
Okay, so we do have a few questions. I'm going to first start with Jan McKinney. Jan, can you unmute yourself? And then I'm going to go through and scroll through the chat for those that were posted throughout. Jan, you can go ahead. Oh, I'm trying to unmute. Okay, so I'm going to go to Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, if you would like to go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I have two. Should I ask them both or just one?
No, go for it.
Okay, first question. The 3-year freeze, when you appeal, it isn't clear to me what it is that triggers that, because I had appealed 1 year and they offered me a deal and a letter in the mail and I said, okay, but then I didn't get the freeze and they jacked it up the next year. And then the next year I appealed and I went to the board hearing and they offered me a deal across the table. And I remember the year before and said no, and I did get the 3-year freeze, but I didn't know if I hadn't said no, if I wouldn't have or not.
Just by appearing at the Board of Equalization hearing, you would have gotten the freeze.
So if I had just said okay when the assessor had offered me the deal there at the hearing, I would have gotten the freeze.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And my next question, for someone who is rapidly approaching various ages where I might be eligible for exemptions, is the first one 62?
Mm-hmm.
And is that need-based or just age-based?
Need-based. So other than the 165 and older that doesn't have an income limit, all the senior exemptions are based, there are income caps. Now, I will say, especially if you're retired, most of that income isn't going to count. So it's worth checking to see if you're eligible for it. And sort of as you age, the amount of income that you can have goes up.
But there is an exemption at 65 where that is independent of need.
Right.
So, okay, that's the one then. Got it. Thank you.
Ms. McKinney, were you able to unmute yourself?
Looks like it.
I don't know what's happening here.
Yeah, it's showing that you're not muted, but is there a volume?
You can type it. If you type it in the chat, then we can read it out loud. For whatever reason, we aren't able to hear you. So if you want to do that, go ahead and do that, and I'll look for it. Okay. Miss Gloria Hawkins-Wynn.
Hey, Miss Samantha. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to piggyback on Jim's questions. For example, one year my taxes were frozen, but I was not certain. So I went back in and submitted an appeal that year. Did that unfreeze the taxes at that point?
Yeah. So unfortunately, if you file another appeal, then it allows them to change the value.
Next question. Jim was asking about the years. My understanding 70 is another trigger for greater exemptions. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's 62, 65, and 70. And each one sort of adds to the other ones. And each one, the income limit goes up a little bit. So you can, even if you were over the income limit for the 62 or for the need-based 65, you may be qualified for the 70.
If on your statement, if you see something that says CFI frozen, what does that mean?
Is it CFI or CPI?
CPI, maybe, yeah, I know there's a C and an I, it might be a P. What does it mean, CPI frozen? What does that mean?
So that's the floating exemption. That's the taxable value on the categories that it's covering is capped at increasing no more than the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, for the year. And even if the CPI index were higher than 3%, it would only go up 3%.
Okay, so that's something that appears on all statements. Wasn't peculiar to my particular tax statement. Is that correct?
I believe so. There's also a senior freeze, which is a little bit different, but
I'm sorry I came in late. I had a standing meeting. Last two questions. Homestead exemption. When is the last time to file for that this year?
April 1st.
April 1st.
A week from tomorrow.
I'm sorry?
A week from tomorrow.
A week from tomorrow. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much. Good stuff. Thank you.
Okay, so everybody try to limit to one question. And those that we don't cover, please put in the chat, and we're going to make sure that we get them to the instructor. I believe I found Miss Jan's question before I get to you, Miss Walker. What are your thoughts on appealing the Superior Court if the results of the hearing is not satisfactory?
I'm not sure what thought you want. That is allowed. If you are not happy with the Board of Equalization decision, then there's the right to appeal the Superior Court. When you appeal the Superior Court, the first thing they have to do is do a settlement conference. So it may be worth at least trying for that to see if you can reach an agreement with the assessor's office at the settlement conference. If you're not able to reach an agreement at that, then you're going to have to pay the $25 filing fee and go through the court process, and it could take a while. But you have every right to do that.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I would like to know a little bit more about the income, and you said that they should not or would not count on Social Security. And I asked this question because I went into the tax office maybe 2 weeks ago, were the age 65. And all they wanted to know was on the tax return, I think it was just a certain line. And they just said, your income is over the limit, which I wasn't even applying for that. I was trying to apply for the age 65. So do I need to go back again and have them to look at the income and say, you all should not count Social Security?
So the way they do it, the different exemptions have different income limits, or the criteria is different for different types of exemptions. And but most of them either go off of your federal adjusted gross income, or there's a net income, or there's some that just flat out like will exclude a certain amount of Social Security from the income. So with all three of those, Social Security generally is not going to count because most Social Security is not taxable, so it's not going to be your federal adjusted gross income. It's not going to include that. The Georgia net income is going to exclude, I think it's like 40,000 for an individual and like 80,000 for a couple. So each of them have different ways of calculating it, but they all involve excluding most Social Security. So that's why I always say, go in and try. Some of them do look at the household income, so sometimes that can push things over. For the 65, there is one for no income that you should be able to get, regardless of your income. But it depends on what your income is to know if they were calculating that right.
Okay, because when you go into the office now, you don't actually go into the office. They just take your information. I guess because of COVID, they just take your information and they go in. So you really don't know what they're putting in because you're not sitting in the room, with them. So I guess I'll just have to wait for the tax bill and see what they have done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or what you can do is when the notice of assessment comes out, look at what the code is and see if the, well, you may have to ask the assessor's office what that code means. But if it's not, if you don't think it's the right exemption, give us a call. Legal aid, we're helping a lot of people with their tax appeals, and that includes appealing the lack of a Hempstead exemption.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, Miss Latanya Shannon, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello. My question is, can you tell me the easiest way to obtain a copy of my vehicle registration? I was actually trying to do my homestead exemption on yesterday, and I don't have it, and I could not find it. And I was online and they kept asking me to fill out a form, and it seemed like that would take too long. So how can I obtain that? Do I just go down to the tax office to the, what do I do?
Yeah, you can go down to the tax office and ask for a copy. The quickest and easiest though is to go online. There actually is an online link where you can ask for I think it's a replacement registration, and when you do that, it almost immediately will send it to you. You send it by email. I think it even allows you to pull it up right after, and you can print it as a PDF to be able to upload it.
Okay, couldn't find
I
it where it would be right off.
can put the link in the chat after we get done with the questions.
Thanks, Samantha.
Sure.
Okay. Mrs. Olivia Woods, if you would unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. what is the law that governs this? The reason I'm asking is because I've tried to apply for a homestead exemption twice and was misled by the county agent both times. One, I just wanted the basic homestead exemption, but was told that my income was too high. The second was when my mother passed and tried to file for her home, and they just told us that because it wasn't in our name, we couldn't file for it. And we were her children. So this is new news to me that we were qualified based on what you're saying. So what is the law that governs this?
Yeah, so this is why I'm out here talking about this, because I hate that they're turning people away like that. So the statute that would allow you as the child of the homeowner to get it is 48.540. I want to say D, but 48.53 D or somewhere in there. I can find the exact citation, but it's in the definitions of what is a homestead exemption. So I don't see how they can say that it doesn't say what it says. And basically what we've been doing is just anytime I have a client that's applying for the homestead exemption, I'll assist them. And then when it comes back that they've been denied, then we appeal it and keep fighting it. What I'm hoping is that one of these days they'll listen and they'll realize that this is such an important thing for legacy homeowners, that they really need this, that they'll actually allowing people to apply for it up front.
I'm 73 years old. I could have gotten exemptions since 65 had I had the correct information.
Right. That's why I'm out here proselytizing.
Thank you.
We're going to take this last question from Ms. Mary Waller Simmons.
Hi, thank you. I'm apparently I'm misunderstanding. Are you saying at 65 and 70 there are no income requirements?
No, there's an exemption available at age 65 that does not have an income limit. That you can get that. Basically, it increases the basic exemption from 30,000 to 50,000.
And there is no income requirement.
Right. There are some additional exemptions that are available at 65 that would be a little bit better, but they do have income limits. And then at 70, there's another set of exemptions that are available, but those also have income limits.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, Jennifer, we're going to turn it over to you and get started on how to avoid scams.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So I'm Jennifer Rettenbach, also a staff attorney at Atlanta Legal Aid, and I work in a specialty unit at Atlanta Legal Aid called our Home Defense Program. I work solely on homeowner legal issues, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about some different types of home scams that we see with far too much frequency in my office and give you some tips about how to avoid them. So I am going to try to share my screen here. Okay. All right. Can you see that okay, Samantha? All right. So home scams. So we'll talk about a couple different buckets of home scams. We'll talk about a number of different kind of home theft scams, where people are trying to steal your home or steal the equity out of your home. We'll talk about mortgage assistance scams, briefly about foreclosure surplus scams, and then we'll end with some tips about general tips about avoiding scams. And I'll take questions at the end the same way that Stacy did. Okay, let's start with some common features of scams that we see. Aggressive tactics, people who seek out their victims and just keep contacting them over and over, trying to wear them down. Things are in a rush. Everything is in a hurry. People who, scammers often are trying to convince their victims that, to take advantage of some quote deal they're offering, that it's got to be done quickly because they don't want people to have time to actually read the documents that they're trying to convince them to sign. Guaranteeing results is often a red flag of a scam. Scammers will often discourage the victims they're targeting from talking to other trusted advisors, from talking to friends, or from talking to the mortgage company. If you've fallen behind on your mortgage, a common tactic of scammers who are telling you that they can help you get caught up may discourage you from talking directly to the mortgage company so they can get in between and try to take your money. Other scammers will pretend to be affiliated with the mortgage company, try to convince you they are the mortgage company, or that they're affiliated with the government or a nonprofit when they aren't really. And then we often see scammers who, by one way or another, trick people into signing documents that they don't understand, or documents that the scammer tells the victim is something other than what it is. So for various types of home fraud and home equity theft, various attempts to steal the equity out of people's homes, some other common features we see, scammers are targeting vulnerable communities and claiming to help. That they're people who are experiencing hardship in one way or another. There are lots of people out there who will tell people that they are going to be their savior, they can help them, when really their intent is to steal. Scammers often attempt to gain people's trust by trying to get to know them a little bit, pretending to be their friend. They're going to help them with things. They may give small gifts. Often scammers use robocalling, so spam calls, unsolicited texts and emails offering deals and unsolicited offers of help are all things to be very wary about. We see scammers advertising on scams on utility pole signs, people going door to door in neighborhoods. And again, that red flag about be very wary about a rushed process of somebody telling you to, take advantage of this help, that it's got to happen fast, because they don't want you to have time to think. We buy houses, fast cash, those kinds of things should put up a red flag that you need to be very cautious with who you're dealing with. Okay, some specific types of home theft schemes that we see, and we'll talk in detail about some of these. So the deed hidden in loan documents, we'll talk a little more about that. A sale of your home with a buyback option. The very fast sale for way below what your home is really worth. Predatory loans. Home purchase scams. We're going to talk a little bit more about a couple different buckets of home purchase scams, rent to own schemes, including lease purchase options, land contracts, and seller financing. We call these scams because they are often set up to fail, or at least have a very high risk of failure for the purported buyer, and home repair and improvement scams. So let's move into a little more detail on those kinds of scams. So the deed hidden in loan documents. So this is a scam that we have seen a number of these cases in my office. What they typically look like is, you have a homeowner who's having some kind of financial hardship, some kind of financial stress, and needs money. So along comes the scammer who says they're going to be the savior and going to offer a loan to help that person out to repay that debt. The scammer comes with a contract, right? That they're telling that victim that, you know, they're going to make a loan. Here are the documents for the loan. Again, this is often a rushed process because the scammer doesn't want you to have time, doesn't want their victim to have time to read the documents, doesn't want the victim to show the documents to someone else. And then lo and behold, within those documents that the scammer has told the homeowner is just a loan, you find there actually is a deed. They've rushed this process, told the victim, you got to hurry up and sign, you know, I'll help you, but we got to get this done. All kinds of reasons it's got to be done in a hurry to get the homeowner to overlook or not ask questions and see that they're actually signing a deed, transferring title to that scammer. Scammer then goes and records that deed and may try to evict the homeowner. So this unfortunately is a scenario we have seen in a number of cases and can be very, very difficult to try to undo this scenario. One of the big takeaways from this scam that I want you to take home is if somebody's trying to rush you to sign documents for any reason, that's a red flag to pause and never, ever, ever sign anything, either in ink or electronically. Electronic documents signed electronically can be just as legally binding as anything you sign in paper with your pen. If someone is trying to rush you to sign something when you haven't had a chance to read it or you don't fully understand it, that is a red flag. Do not sign, because once you sign with your pen or electronically, it can be very, very hard and sometimes impossible to undo the situation. Another home scam we see, we call the home sale with a buyback option. So the way we've seen this happen is, again, a homeowner who is having some kind of financial hardship and financial distress, needs money. Along comes the scammer who says he or she is going to be the savior and help you out. I'll give you money to pay that debt. But wants a deed to the home. And the scammer in this scenario where we've seen this actually happen may offer all kinds of reasons for why it's got to be structured as you sign a deed. But the scammer says, but don't worry, you can stay in the home. You know, you'll be a renter for a time period and you'll have this option to buy it back. I'm going to work with you. You'll be able to buy back your house when you get back on your feet. You know, don't worry, I'm here to help you. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. But unfortunately, what we have seen happen, right, is where the homeowner trusts this person and does this deal. They sign over a deed for an amount that was a loan to pay a debt, not an amount. They didn't intend to sell their house. They didn't get an amount of money to pay a debt that was what the house was worth. It's often much, much less. And they think either they didn't understand the documents or they think they're going to be able to buy it back with that option. But these scenarios are typically designed to fail. Either that option turns out in the fine print to be a lot more expensive than the homeowner realized, or all kinds of things can go wrong with the scammer, just where things don't work out the way you thought, and you don't have the ability to exercise the option and buy it back. And suddenly that scammer, once you sign that deed, is not going to be so friendly. The tone changes dramatically. Scammer no longer willing to work with you to let you exercise that right to buy back the property, because the scammer now has a deed to your house and owns your house for a price to pay that debt that was way less than the home is actually worth. Again, these are real live cases. We've seen a number of these in my office, and they're very, very difficult legally for that homeowner to have any recourse and undo. Another far too common scam we see is the fast sale for far below fair market value. So this kind of scam can present in a number of different ways. The homeowner may want to sell, may be convinced by the scammer to sell, or sometimes the homeowner doesn't have any intention to sell the property at all, but is tricked into signing a document that the homeowner doesn't understand is a contract. So sometimes the scam is the scammer convincing the homeowner that the home is worth far less than it really is, or sometimes the scam is tricking the homeowner, gaining their trust, being their friend, convincing them to sign a document that the homeowner thinks is not a binding sale contract. It can look like a number of different things. I've seen this scenario come up where the homeowner knew they signed a document, but believed that it was not a final binding purchase and sale agreement, that it was a document that the scammer convinced the homeowner, this is what I need you to sign, just so we have something that I can get contractors to come in and look at your house to see what repairs might be needed, so I can figure out a firm price I would offer you, but this is not the final deal. You'll have the right to say if you really want to go forward when I can get people in there and take a look and offer you a final price. But lo and behold, what was actually signed was a binding sales contract to sell the house for far less than it's worth. So unfortunately, that scenario is one we see far too often, of a scammer convincing someone, a homeowner, to sign a document, and the scammer tells that person that the document says and means something very different from what it actually means. And again, once the homeowner signs, whether with the pen or online, we unfortunately see people that don't understand that signing online can be just as legally binding as signing with a pen. Once you actually sign, again, it can be very hard and sometimes impossible to actually unwind that deal. So again, big takeaway. It may seem obvious to some of you, but when people are in distress, have hardships, and people are trying to gain their trust, sometimes people trust people that later they will wish they shouldn't. So, really think about and tell people in your life, if someone is pushing you to sign a document in a hurry, or telling you what a document says and you haven't had time to read it yourself, or you don't feel like you fully understand it, take a step back and say, I need time to look at this. Take it to somebody else, a trusted advisor. Ideally, you'd have your own lawyer, if at all possible. Look at any kind of document like that before you sign. But just take a deep breath, because once you sign, it can be very difficult to unwind. Okay, some other types of home purchase scams, 3 categories, and in these categories, 2 types of rent-to-own deals, a contract for deed and the lease with the option to buy, and we'll talk about seller financing. In my office, we call these scams because the way we see these kinds of deals structured, they are either designed to fail or at least carry such a very high risk of failure for that would-be homeowner, that we think of them as scams and really caution people to stay away from them. So 2 types of rent-to-own deals. The contract for deed, what that is, sometimes called a land installment contract or a bond for title. The idea is you're going to buy a home, but instead of the traditional way of buying a home where you go to closing and you get that deed, you get title, ownership when you close, and there's a mortgage, right? So there's a lien on the property, but you're actually the owner. With a contract for deed, instead, what you sign is a contract that says, yeah, you can move in the house and act like the owner, but you're not going to actually be the legal owner until you make every single payment under that contract. And often these deals are structured so that you're making payments like under a mortgage. So the contract may go for 20 or 30 years, and the contract says you don't get title, you don't get the deed, you're not the owner unless and until you make every single payment along the way. The lease with the option to buy, some of you may be familiar with, that is really 2 contracts. They may be contained in one document, or they may be 2 separate documents, but they're really 2 things. One is that lease where you're a tenant, but then you're also given that option. And and often that option to buy and become the homeowner within a certain period of time, that option costs a lot of money just to have that right to buy the property. So what's wrong with both of those rent to own scenarios? So generally speaking, again, with both of them, you're not the legal owner when you sign the documents, but typically these deals are structured to give you all the burdens of home ownership. So they're often structured so that from day one, even though you're just a tenant with an option or you've just signed that contract, you are typically responsible for paying the property taxes, for paying for homeowners insurance, and for making repairs on the property. And a lot of the situations where we see people entering into these deals, often the properties are in bad shape. And these deals are often marketed to people as, here's an easy way to get into homeownership. It doesn't matter if you have bad credit, you're not going to have to make a big down payment. But often people are unaware of getting into these deals, of how bad the condition of the property actually is and what it's going to cost to make repairs. So a lot of times people get into these deals and with that lease with the option to buy, it's actually illegal for the landlord, while you're in the lease term, to shift the repair obligation to the tenant. But we see this happening anyway. So what that means, right, is that would-be homeowner, you're not legally the owner yet, but you're paying all the burden of home ownership and maybe investing, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in repairing and improving the property, paying the property taxes, but you're not the legal owner, so you can't sell the property if you want to get out of the deal. And the really big risk is these contracts typically say that if you are late on one single payment, then they can summarily evict you as if you were just a tenant, you hadn't put all that money in the property, you can get evicted and lose it all. So it's a really, really high risk of you make one little footfall, fall behind on a payment for 1 month, and you can lose everything you've invested for years. So we caution people, try to stay away from those type of rent to own deals if at all possible. Okay, another risky path to home ownership that we caution people to try to avoid: seller financing and wraparound mortgages. So the concept of seller financing is just what it sounds like. It means you're going to buy a home, but your mortgage, that mortgage loan to buy the property, doesn't come from a traditional lender like a bank or credit union. Your seller says, I'll make the loan to you. So what could be wrong with that? Well, a couple things are often wrong with that. Often these arrangements are offered because the buyer at that point in time is not in a situation to qualify for a bank or credit union loan. And what the seller is going to offer is often a predatory, very expensive loan with high interest rate, high fees. Where we see these arrangements, the documents are often not easy to understand. So there may be a lot of hidden fees, and the buyer may not fully be aware up front of actually how much it's going to cost when they get into this deal. With seller financing is often poorly managed. These are often people who they're not in the business of making mortgage loans the way a bank or credit union is. So math errors along the way, poor record keeping can become a real problem for the buyer in these scenarios. And then another really big risk is with seller financing, it may be what's called a wraparound mortgage. So that concept is buyer, right, buys a house from the seller and the seller makes the loan. So the buyer didn't make didn't get a mortgage loan and make a big lump sum payment to the seller that the seller used to pay off their own mortgage. So often what's happening here is the seller still has its underlying mortgage in place. So that loan from the seller to the buyer, that's why it's called a wraparound. It just wraps that existing mortgage loan that didn't go away. So the concept of what's supposed to happen is buyer makes their monthly payment to the seller seller is supposed to be taking some of that monthly payment each month and paying that existing mortgage loan that the seller already had on the property and it's still there. So here's what this looks like. You could probably guess what the risk is here. Jane Buyer, right, pays Mr. Seller on the seller financing mortgage loan every month. Mr. Seller is supposed to turn around and pay Main Street Bank, who has that pre-existing mortgage loan on the property. But if seller doesn't pay Main Street Bank, Jane Buyer is going to have a legal claim against Mr. Seller for not doing that, but Main Street Bank can still foreclose. So Jane Buyer's done everything right, made all their payments, but because there was that pre-existing mortgage loan on the property that didn't get paid, Jane Buyer still loses the home to foreclosure. And good luck chasing Mr. Seller with those legal claims. So our advice in my unit, as we see far too many of these situations that go terribly wrong, is the safest way to buy a home is the traditional way that, these arrangements I'm talking about are often marketed to people as a way to get into home ownership more quickly. You know, if your credit's not great, you don't have the money for a big down payment, these contracts for deed, lease purchase options, seller financing are pushed to people as we'll get you into a home quicker. We really caution people, don't take that risk, because the risk that you're actually going to succeed, the chance that you're going to succeed and be a long-term homeowner, it's just too risky, too much risk of failure. You are better off to wait, work on your credit, work on your savings, and go the old-fashioned way of waiting until you're in a position to qualify for a mortgage loan from a bank or a credit union, where you'll have a closing that's handled by a closing attorney. You get the protections of a title exam is done.
Jennifer, I'm sorry, the slide is blank. Is there something supposed to be on the slide?
Yeah, that's weird. Can you see that one?
It's just, well, the top part says seller finance and wraparound mortgages, but there's no information on it. It's just a blank slide. But it's like, I know she's talking passionately about it though.
Okay, and you still don't see anything?
No, ma'am.
They're not advancing. Yeah, thank you. Let me stop the share. So the slide stopped moving for some reason. Stop share. Let me try to, thank you for letting me know.
Thanks, Khalifa.
Okay, let me find where we were. Advance too far. Okay. Are you seeing, I'm trying to get back to where we were. Are you seeing what's on my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I believe this is where we were.
Where we were, okay. Okay, this was the example that I was trying to show of where Jane Buyer doesn't pays Mr. Seller doesn't pay Main Street Bank. Okay, yes, and we were on the safer way to buy a home. Going that traditional route, you'll have a closing handled by a closing attorney, which is really important for a number of reasons. But one of the really important things with that closing handled by a closing attorney is there'll be a title examination. You have a chance to get title insurance, which is so important, because what title insurance is it's a one-time payment made at closing when you buy a house. And it is insurance that the seller who is selling you the property actually owns it, has good title to sell it. So when you buy, you're really going to be the owner. And they don't have any other mortgages or other liens that aren't being paid off with you the buyer, your purchase funds. So you're not going to be at risk of that underlying, that pre-existing mortgage loan or other liens being foreclosed and you losing the house. Okay. Moving on to other types of scams to avoid. So mortgage assistance scams. So we saw a lot of mortgage assistance scams in the prior recession that occurred when lots of people were struggling on their mortgages. We are starting to hear about them again. Many of you may know people, may be aware that because of COVID, there have been a lot of people understandably struggling on their mortgages, a lot of people in what are called COVID forbearances, where they've had a period of time where they don't have to pay their mortgage, or they're trying to recover from a COVID hardship. Coming out of those forbearances, they've got to deal with the missed payments, or just they missed payments, even if they haven't been in forbearance because of COVID, right? Lots of people struggling. Unfortunately, people struggling and being potentially at risk of foreclosure also brings these scammers out of the woodwork. People who offer mortgage assistance to help people get caught up on their mortgages, but the scammers really intend to just take money from people. So the kinds of scams we see are people charging money to help people stop a foreclosure, but instead just taking the money and not actually doing anything. We also see people in this area telling people they're going to help them with their mortgage and collecting sensitive data from their victims, their bank information, their social security number, so they can then turn around, right, and commit fraud, identity theft with that information. In this area, be really wary of someone who says they're going to help you, but you need to pay them. First, beware up front of anybody saying they're offering mortgage assistance, but you got to pay them up front. That's a red flag. But then particularly also beware of anybody saying you need to make a payment by gift card. Any non-traditional means of payments is a red flag, and that gift card scam is a big one. We've seen people who've been scammed by people impersonating the mortgage lender, telling them that, convincing the victim that they are the mortgage lender and then requesting payment through gift cards. That is a red flag that something is not right. So again, often they're just taking people's money and doing nothing. Big takeaway to know here is that in the mortgage assistance area, where if you or someone you know has fallen behind on their mortgage, there is help available for free. So let me give you, and here, so you can certainly call Atlanta Legal Aid if you, and we're a nonprofit law firm, so we have income and asset limitations, but if you qualify for our services and you live in the 5 metro county area, then we may be able to give you advice, or if you're a senior and live anywhere in the state, then we may be able to give you advice about what to do if you've fallen behind in your mortgage. Anyone can contact a HUD-certified housing counselor. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development pays people to be nonprofit housing counselors giving advice for free to homeowners. And there's a link where you can find a counselor to talk to you about what your options may be if you're struggling on your mortgage. And then we also encourage you, if you or someone you know has been the victim or targeted for any kind of scam we're talking about today, but particularly mortgage assistance scams, we encourage you to report to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, because they do go after people, particularly in the mortgage assistance area. Okay, and then another moving topics to another kind of scam we see, the foreclosure surplus scam. So this is something we've seen more of because
Frozen again.
What's that?
It's frozen. There's nothing.
Okay. No, yeah, I'm good. Sorry, it looks like it is. I'm gonna, yes. Thank you for this. This is the scam we've seen more of because home values have risen over the last number of years. So what happens is with a foreclosure sale, if someone loses their home to foreclosure, then you may know the way the foreclosure process works in Georgia is it's the first Tuesday of every month is foreclosure Tuesday, where homes that are being foreclosed on are sold at public auction on the courthouse steps in the county where the property is located. So anybody can show up and bid to buy properties out of foreclosure. when someone buys a property at foreclosure, whatever is paid for that home, if the amount paid is more than the homeowner owned on the property, their mortgage and any other liens, if it's more than was owed, there's a surplus. And particularly with home values having risen in the last number of years, there are plenty of instances where there are surpluses and sometimes big surpluses of money that should go back to the homeowner. So the surplus, the important takeaway here is that former homeowner who unfortunately has been foreclosed on, that person is entitled to that surplus without paying anyone any money whatsoever. If you or someone you know is in this situation, you should never pay anyone to help you get the surplus money you're owed. What should happen is that homeowner, former homeowner who was foreclosed on, should contact the foreclosure law firm, the law firm that handled the foreclosure, ask for an accounting of the funds from how much was paid, the purchase price, what it was applied to, and the homeowner's entitled to that information. Homeowner may be asked to sign a document releasing any claims once they get their money, but then you get the money. That's what should happen. Unfortunately, there are scammers out there telling people who don't know the process to recover their money that the only way, right, that they'll ever get their money is if they pay somebody to go get it for them. So scammers, unfortunately, offer to help get the funds for a fee. And sometimes it's a really big fee, a percentage of the surplus. They get that homeowner, former homeowner, to sign a document that assigns the rights to them. And then they just go contact the foreclosure firm to get the money and take often thousands away from that party who's already gone through a very difficult, stressful situation. So never pay for help if you or someone you know should be getting a foreclosure surplus. All right. Coming near to the end, I know it's a long evening. A few takeaways to protect yourself from scams. Some of these I've said, but I think they're worth repeating. Never, ever sign any documents, any paper of any kind, either, in front of you with a pen or electronically. Never sign anything that you haven't read or that you don't understand. Take the time, if somebody's trying to get you to sign something, to have a trusted advisor, hopefully a lawyer or someone else that you trust, to review documents with you before you sign. We've seen too many people come to our office saying, yeah, I signed something, but it wasn't a contract. They told me it wasn't a contract. Too many scammers will misrepresent, just lie about the legal impact of what a document you're being asked to sign is. Be careful about paying for help. We talked tonight about some areas where there is free help available. So first, try to figure out if you can get help from a HUD-certified housing counseling agency or others without paying. Don't answer those robocalls. Be careful about opening spam texts or emails and clicking on email links. All those are ways that scammers target people in distress. And finally, don't give anyone you don't know and trust. Never, ever give anyone you don't know and trust your social security number or your bank information. And then finally, have some places to get help. That's a direct line to my unit, the Home Defense Program at Atlanta Legal Aid, or you can go online to atlantalegalaid.org and apply online for assistance. I've included phone numbers there for our Georgia Senior Legal Hotline for anyone in the state of Georgia who's over 60. Again, where you can find a HUD-certified housing counselor or report scams to the FTC. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have any questions in regards to this presentation that Jennifer just completed for us? Looking at Daniel Vasquez.
Hey, thank you so much for taking my question. So I don't know if this is applicable, but every 2 hours, really, every 2 hours, I get phone calls from, it appears the same person looking for someone who's not me, this guy named Derek, and wanting to know if Derek wants to sell his home. And when I either respond saying I'm not Derek, or when I try to act like I'm Derek so I can get more information, when they realize that I'm not Derek or I'm, joking or whatever, they hang up immediately and I can never call the number back. How do I report those people, or how do I get on the don't call me list?
Yeah, so those are great questions. So it would be great to report that to the FTC. I think the challenge there is, right, do you have enough information to report? So you could try reporting to the FTC with just the phone number if you can tell what phone number they're calling from. But that's a tough one because it's not very much information for the Federal Trade Commission to go on. And I think it probably is a scam, right, of some kind or another, right? I don't know who they're trying to find, but right, it is probably somebody trying to convince someone to sell their home, probably my guess, for far less than it's worth. That's the kind of scenario we hear. I don't know how to get on the do not call list. I know that I need to make a note to myself to look that up because I know those lists are out there and you can get on them. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that, but that's a great question.
Thank you.
Our next question from Mrs. Hawkins-Wynn.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you very much. Individual who's going through a divorce and the house is in forbearance, has been in forbearance for 9 months, I believe. Should she have documentation that lies out the terms of the forbearance? And are there a number of different scenarios by which that forbearance is dealt with at the end, whether it's the sale of the house or whether one or the two of the individuals decide to resume residence in the house? So 2 questions. Should there be forbearance documents that speak to the terms of the forbearance and what occurs after it comes out of forbearance? Essentially, I think that's the question.
Yes, that is a great question. So and I could talk for a long time about aspects of this. Let me try to make it short of the highlights. So with forbearances, ideally there would be a document, but what we've seen is there often isn't. A lot of mortgage companies have been sending letters just confirming how long the forbearance lasts, but not everyone has. But I would encourage the person to call and ask for that. Because they should be able to get it. It should be produced. So I would call and ask because you don't want there to be any confusion about when the forbearance ends. Now, in terms of the options at the end of the forbearance, what the options may be will differ depending on what type of loan it is. So a big bucket of loans we call federally backed loans. So those loans include loans that are FHA insured, loans that are owned by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, VA, Department of Veteran Affairs loans, or USDA loans. All those type of loans have lots of public information available about what the options at the end of a forbearance are. And they all have programs, particularly a COVID forbearance, because there's been this big push of new programs because there's so many people that have been struggling. And generally speaking, if you have a federally backed mortgage loan, generally speaking, there are going to be options available when you come out of a forbearance to deal with the missed payments that there are generally going to be options to keep you in your home that don't involve you having to pay a lump sum of those missed payments. So right in a forbearance, and should say this because people who aren't familiar with the concept may not know, when you're in a forbearance, you're given a time period because you're suffering a hardship where you don't have to make your mortgage payments, but those payments are not forgiven. They're not excused. They have to be dealt with. But all those federally backed programs, mortgage loan programs, have really good programs to help people deal with those missed payments, either through a loan modification that spreads the payments out over time, by extending the maturity or moving the missed payments into a lump sum at the end of the loan, years and years from now. If you have a different kind of loan, a private loan, you just have to ask your servicer. The private loans, and that's like half the mortgage loan market in the US, generally don't publish what their programs are, but we are aware that many private mortgage loan companies are offering programs to help people coming out of forbearance, to help them resume paying in a way that, you know, doesn't require a lump sum huge payment that's going to be unaffordable. One thing I will say, this is an area where I would definitely encourage people, if they have this situation, want to know the options, call legal aid. We work with people in this area a lot, and or call a HUD-certified housing counselor, because housing counselors are up on what the options are and in helping people work with their mortgage company to make sure that the mortgage servicers are offering people what they're the options they're entitled to.
Okay, Mrs. Sharon Jenkins.
Okay, I had to unmute. Yes, well, number one, I see these ads all of the time. We're talking about scams that say if you owe less than $500,000 on your house, that the government will pay it off for you if you have no missed payments. Is that a scam? What's that all about?
I think that's a scam. I believe that's a scam. I'm not aware of any.
How can they get away with that advertising?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've seen that ad too, and I don't know who's putting that up and where it, but that's not a program that I don't believe that program exists.
I see the number to call, but I'm afraid to call, so I don't call.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking this is the perfect time to ask.
I think that's a scam. I would not call it.
Okay, then one other, please. I'll try to make it brief. I do have a tax appeal hearing that, to me, they just kind of kicked it down the road, put it off, and I haven't been able to resolve it since July. Can I get you guys to help me with that?
So you could certainly call legal aid to see if, so we do have, because we're a nonprofit, we have certain eligibility criteria, but I would certainly encourage you to, hopefully you got the number from, it'll be on Stacy's slides. I know we're going to be emailed out, and the numbers to call are on there to see if we can assist with that.
Yeah, we do have a Fulton property tax appeal project that we do with our pro bono unit. So it does have some income limits on who we can help, but we can certainly consider whether or not you would qualify and see if we can find a volunteer lawyer to help you. But
okay, so I can get that number from one of the slides that you have.
Yeah, or I'll paste it into the chat here.
Awesome. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Valuable information, valuable, all of it.
Thank you for coming.
Let me see. How can you identify whether there is a lien on your property?
Yes. So the lien records are public information that can be searched through, and I could put that in the chat through it's GSCCA. I believe you could also go to the county courthouse in your county and ask them how to search. But let me drop in the chat where you can go to search for that. So this link that I sent has lien records and real property records. Search lien records. So certain liens would appear in the lien records. A mortgage would appear in the real property records.
Okay. So I was trying to scroll up, but unfortunately they're a little farther up than I would like. Well, so everyone that had questions that were left from the first, because I don't believe we have any more questions on the home scamming parts, but if you do, or if you think of something when the course ends, please feel free to email me, and I would definitely send that to Jennifer so that she can answer any of those questions. You all are, I'm about to actually pull up, for those who, wait, I think there are new questions. Oh no, okay. So there are questions that were not answered in the prior presentation. I'm going to send those to Stacy so that she can answer those on you all's behalf, and you will get those via email as well. I would like to thank you all for coming and actually doing this course for us. We actually have 2 more courses with them, and I will talk more about them actually probably in the next on our social media. But we do have 2 more courses, one about avoiding foreclosures, and the next one will be rental assistance, or how assistance help for tenants so that they're not being taken advantage of for renters. So those are our 2 courses that Atlanta Legal Aid will be working with us, and I'm so happy to have them with us. If you all would take a quick second to look at our screen, if it's sharing our next courses that are coming up for NPU University. If you were a part of the Zoning Fundamentals 1 class, the Zoning Fundamentals 2 follow-up is this Wednesday. I've spoken to some students already who won't be able to make it. However, watching the video, doing an assignment will allow you to participate in the final lab. And then we will have our Introduction to Invest Atlanta, which is April 7th. That's the Thursday after next. And at the end of the month, April 28th, we will have our Workforce Development course. So I appreciate you all for participating in NPU University. If you would like to, just be caught up on information as far as courses, all things that are neighborhood planning units, please follow us at NPU Atlanta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as on Nextdoor. And all of our courses can be found, previous courses from last year as well as this year, on our YouTube channel. So if you all miss a class and you just want to go back and go through those, they are online for your viewing pleasure. But if we don't have any more questions, you all are free to go, and I appreciate you sticking around these 2 hours. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Samantha. Awesome program. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Good stuff.
Have a good one.